Hi, I'm Danny Brown, and welcome to my Other Podcasters, the show that brings you podcasters from around the world to talk about their other podcasts, the one that's completely different from their main show. Today, I'm joined by Gareth Davis from Shepperton in the UK. Gareth is a media composer and also an audio producer at the Sound Boutique, an award winning audio production company whose work can be heard in numerous mediums, including TV. Gareth's main podcast is The Music Room, which we'll talk about shortly. And his other podcast, well, we'll talk about that shortly too. But first, Gareth, welcome to my other podcasters.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks so much for having me. It's a really good experience. Yeah.
And thanks for joining. I mentioned there you're from Shepperton. There's a
Yes,
famous movie studio there, isn't there? Or is it
there
still there?
is. Yes, it is. We're just down the road from there, and recently massively expanded. So there's the balance of people um, who are outcrying at the lorries wheeling past, and then but obviously it's good for the economy, local economy, to up the trade and all that. But yeah, legendary. I still feel a little bit in awe from being, when I go past the sign. It's really good.
Well, when you think of some of the movies, was some of the James Bond movies shot there, the early ones, I feel,
For sure.
Shepperton?
Yes, it will have been. I mean, yeah, a lot of the Hollywood films have been here, but it's got a massive, like you say, there's a rich history attached to it. So you can go back and actually, a fellow composer of mine, Keith Hopwood, who was the guitarist in Herman's Hermits. I don't know if anyone.
Oh, yes, I do. Something good.
Yeah. So we met as composers. Keith's older now, but he was saying, I remember filming, films with the Herman's Hermits back in the day and staying in such and such hotel and all that. So yeah, quite amazing. Tom Jones as well, I think, was a local
Ah,
resident.
Tom
He was
Jones, legend.
filming. Yeah.
Now you got me jealous now. I'm going to have to go back and listen to my Tom Jones Spotify playlist. Love that guy. Amazing.
Well, that's not unusual. Oh, stop
No,
it. You can cut
oh my
that bit
god.
out.
Okay, we're going to keep the puns in. We're going to have a running counter of how many puns we can get into this
Yeah.
this episode.
Okay.
So as I mentioned at the start, obviously we'll talk about the Music Room, which is your main podcast in a moment. But first, I've got to let the audience know that you're actually a bona fide celebrity when it comes to audio, because your work is currently featured on TV shows Toad and Friends on Warner Brothers Discovery and Scream Street on Children's BBC in the UK, CBBC. So how's that been working on these shows?
It's been fantastic. I'm a musician primarily. I grew up with all that orchestral training and everything like that. So to work on these shows has been absolutely amazing. I wouldn't call myself a bona fide celebrity by any means. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. I prefer working in a darkened room away from everyone else. But actually, contributing to the storytelling that way. You know, I love the teamwork that happens around productions. Much the same as podcast productions. You have a team
Hmm.
where you're getting everything together and working towards the same goal. But yeah, it's still I still pinch myself when I see things that I've put music to on the telly. It's still a great feeling. And the Scream Street Christmas special was another one. To see something at Christmas on the TV, yeah, it's quite
Hmm.
something. But I just love that kind of that level of storytelling. Really, you're contributing something to an overall picture.
And Toad and Friends, that's based on the classics children's book, Wind in the Willows, which I feel probably every kid in the UK at some stage has had access or been introduced to Wind in the Willows. It's an amazing, amazing book. And I'm wondering, does that add any extra pressure because you're dealing with such a classic that people know when it comes to coming up with a soundtrack for that?
Yes, is the short answer. Um, the whole production team actually felt that weight of responsibility because it's such an amazing classic property. It was, yes, we all felt that weight of responsibility, and as such, there was a real open door policy. Um, Everyone wanted to help everyone else, so it was such a joy to work on. It's probably a career highlight for me to work on something like that. Um, I mean, it's wind in the willows. It's such an amazing,
Yeah.
amazing thing. And actually, I live down the road from where the whole thing is based. Oh, I just got
Oh
a.
wow.
So yeah, for me, I was just in the process of buying a little boat when when I pitched for it as well. So I can go down the river here at Shepperton, um, and I'm passing boats called Ratty and Toad and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, just quite an amazing thing. But yes, the whole process was wonderful. Loved it.
I have to. I'm not sure we can probably get that here actually on Warner Bros. Discovery. I'd love to check that out because I know. Oh, I'm in Canada, obviously. Well, not obviously because my accent isn't Canadian, but I'm in Canada, so we're very different from UK. We get like some BBC channels, etc., some
Yeah.
CBC, but you have to have different apps, so I'd have to check that out.
Yeah, I think it's coming to certainly the UK and the US in the autumn. So you can keep an eye out on there. But I'm sure I'll be shouting about it on the socials when it does.
I will look out for that for sure. So, as I mentioned at the start, Gareth, your main podcast is the Music Room, but I think, in all honesty, I would do it a bit of a disservice if I just call it a podcast because it's more a collective than a podcast with various components. So, can you share the story of the Music Room and the different parts to it?
Yeah, it has. Yeah, collective is a good word actually. I think ecosystem as well. Um, but the reason I started podcasting in the first place is because when I became a professional composer, I had no idea how to find resources and which organizations were relevant to me, what best practice looked like. So the music room, really, the podcast is for me 12 years ago when I became a professional musician. And it's for people entering the industry who might feel a bit daunted by it. It's for people who are trying to navigate their way through their careers now. I'm still learning from the amazing guests I have. Um, and most of all, like you said, collective. It's about community, really. Bottom line, to be given the chance to mix with other composers, songwriters, and musicians, and to help and support each other. So that's really my kind of remit to myself when I'm making any kind of content for that podcast.
And there's a huge, you mentioned community. There's a large community, obviously, over on Substack, where you've got the podcast, you've got a newsletter, you've got articles, you've got guests, you've got resources. What are some of the resources that you offer to people in the space? Because obviously, it's not just about newcomers. You offer it to all levels of expertise.
Absolutely. Actually, that's, I feel, one of the unique things about it is you can have hobbyist musicians who are just trying things out, rubbing shoulders with kind of veteran composers who've won awards, but without ego. There's no ego involved, and people can kind of rub along together in a really helpful and supportive way, and that's really the way it's the way I conceived it, and it's seems to be how it's worked out. But yeah, since I moved it to Substack because it was a newsletter as well, I thought I wanted some kind of umbrella, some kind of platform to bring everything together. So as a result, I've started another podcast, which is about independent music discovery,
Oh, nice.
which is called Music, available everywhere, apart from Spotify, but that's another long story. um, and then there's a music media recommendation newsletter called Listen, Watch, Read, which is literally that, does what it says on the tin. And then there are other resources. And in fact, the first podcast that I started with a fellow composer, Dan Watts, in 2019, when it all began for me, we agreed yesterday that we'd bring that into the music room as well. And that has so many there are guests in there who work in TV production from every aspect, and there's a whole season there about the journey of the orchestral score from composer all the way to screen, so all those different jobs as well. So hopefully it's becoming a really valuable resource overall for composers, songwriters, musicians.
And you'd mentioned music, which is a nice segue. I'm glad you mentioned that because I was actually
Oh,
going to
okay.
ask you about that. It's one of the things that I like about the resource over at the music room is you almost have this podcast within a podcast, which, as you mentioned, is music.
Mm.
Um, but do you see that as a complementary project to the music room, or is that standalone from
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, it all becomes a little bit meta, doesn't it? And Inception-like. But yes, definitely complementary. I see the music room as kind of the flagship show, um, and everything. I wanted to extend the offering really to include other things. So music is about music, funnily enough, whereas the Music Room podcast is about people. So
Right.
you're really that's an interview show where I ask people about what they're up to now, the projects, there's news in there, there's community aspects to it as well, and then we go back in time to see how it all began. So it's really about the inspiration behind their musical journeys, and they at the end of it, they offer an item and a piece of advice, kind of desert island disc style, to leave in the music room for others to find. So there's a whole raft of advice as well, which I can draw on for audiograms and such like things.
So you're the Ken Bruce of podcasting then?
Oh, Danny, I don't know why I do it to
Or is that an
myself.
insult? I apologize.
Well, I saw in your description a serial podcaster. I really relate to that because I don't know why we do it to ourselves, but but it's kind of addictive, isn't it?
It's like I always say it's like when you get a tattoo. I don't know if you've got tattoos, but when you get your first one, you always want more. And I think I've got about 6 or 7 now.
Oh wow!
And yeah, podcasting. Yeah, I hear you. Once you start, you're in there.
Have you got any podcast tattoos?
You know what? I don't have, but that's an idea.
Yeah.
Interesting. Get a sponsor to tattoo me.
Can you
It's
can you
yeah.
fit myotherpodcast.com/listen on on a leg or something?
That'd be that'd have to be all the way down from top to bottom, and that'd be like people have to like squint, and that could be like weird on the beach. I think cause some weird issues with the police. But I'll give that a miss, maybe. Maybe just like the little RSS icon or something.
Yeah,
Now it's clear. I
fantastic.
mean, obviously, you mentioned that you started with Dan back in 2019, and you've just said you've now got about 3 or 4 podcasts roundabout
Mm,
or certainly 2 or 3 roundabout the music room. So obviously you're a fan of podcasting, and podcasting is a big part of what you do. And
yeah,
this leads us to your other podcast, which is obviously the show, what the show is about, and what we're here to talk about as well. Um, and this one is called, and this is one that's like a little bit different from what people might expect. This one's Podcasting People, which is more of a podcast industry type show or podcast led show. So, how did that one come about? Because obviously, so far, everything's been music.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. They are kind of connected in a way, which will become clear. But I found myself um, because I've been podcasting since 2019, so it's about 5 years, and you obviously get good, don't you, at all the aspects, different aspects of
Hopefully,
podcasting.
anyway.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
And being an audio professional by trade,
Mm.
um, I have those things in my skill set anyway. So I was kind of more rerouting, dialogue editing and things like that came very naturally. And I found myself gaining clients on the podcast side through fixing problematic audio, dialogue editing, repurposing content from video to podcast and things like that. So I've kind of found myself in the same position I was in when I started as a composer, except this time in that, in the rapidly evolving podcast industry. So what better way what way could there be to gain insights, speak to people working in the industry, and more importantly, bringing people together to put human faces on these roles? What better way to do all that than make a podcast about it? It's just a brilliant way to A, network, and B, learn, and C, share the knowledge with each other. I've had some really lovely comments from industry folk, and between guests as well. Guests get to know each other as well. So so that was really the motivation for it.
Looking at the guests that have been on there, I know some of the names there from the podcasting space. Obviously, in the most recent one,
Yeah,
Tony Doe, I have to say, he's got one of the most perfect podcast voices I have ever heard.
absolutely right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's just so smooth.
Yep, exactly.
He's
And I
got the
think he's
late
also,
night
he
radio,
mentioned,
isn't he?
well, and that's in his background is in radio.
Mm,
For like 20 years, I think he's mentioned. He's been in
yeah,
radio. But yeah, whenever I hear Tony speak, it relaxes me. I'm
yeah,
ready to listen to whatever he's going to say.
yeah. Very much so. Yeah, I also love the fact that all the guests are different. It's not like I could have made the podcast editors podcast,
Right.
and I'm sure that would have been brilliant. But I wanted a variety of jobs. I love the variety in industry. I used to do a podcast called Creative Cuppa, which was following all the kind of creative threads through all the
Mm.
different creative jobs, from photographers to music to art to whatever it might be. So I love that variety of things. So I actually ask each guest what they love about podcasts and podcasting, and there's always, some of them answers are quite similar, but there's always something a little bit different from a different perspective. So hopefully there's an overall picture that's good.
And what I like about the format as well, it's an interesting little format because the episodes are fairly short. They're round about 5, maybe 6 minutes
Yeah,
long, with an occasional slightly longer bit. The episodes are pretty short, um, but they also don't have a host per se. They don't have you
yeah,
introducing the show. They don't have you, but you know, like bookmarking the guest, etc. The guest is essentially the host on each episode, and as you mentioned, talk about a topic that's relevant to them, and they share their expertise and a takeaway for listeners. So I'm curious, was that um, was that something that was deliberate from the start? That might sound like a really stupid question, uh, or where did that idea come from to just have the guest as the host every episode?
yeah. Well, it's a little bit of a mantra of mine, which I'm sure a lot of podcasters find, which is it's not about me. It's never about me. I'm sure there are kind of monologue style podcasts where, of course, it's about the person sharing their thoughts. But for something like this, I felt it was the guest giving advice to the listener. It's nothing to do with me, really. I'm just there to facilitate that process. Um, I also like the idea of guests kind of taking ownership of an
Hmm.
episode. I'm there to produce and guide them through it. But essentially, they're putting out a kind of mini-sode, or whatever you like to call it, um, and feel that pride in what they've done. So it's them from start to finish. I'm actually going to put out a new trailer. I gather the comments at the end, the outros and things like that. But I always ask them to do a couple of lines, which I put into a little trailer. So I'm
Hmm.
about to update that, and it's really lovely. Them all saying, "Hi, I'm so and so," and then at the end, "And you're listening to Podcasting People. Find it here," and it's them saying it, and I really love that. So the short answer is, yeah, it's not about me; it's about them speaking to the listener.
And as I mentioned, obviously the episode length is fairly short. It's about
Yeah.
4 or 5 minutes on average. Um, was that the format of the show? Did it come by based on the answers? Did you always have it in mind that it was going to be a very short episode for each guest and keep it like that, or was it more organic? How did that come about from that side?
Yeah, it was always the intention. I don't know whether it's because we're living in a TikTok world and we're, anything over 5 minutes and the attention span goes. I think it was more, um, I've had this kind of this ideology of trim the fat. You know, ever since I was playing in a band and we were writing songs together, there's always this idea of, you know, if it's not necessary, why is it in there? So I was really thinking about that as well. How do I get to the guts of this thing and you know, that's part of the reason I'm not in there myself. They don't want to hear from me. Let's get right to the core really quickly. And for an industry podcast, yes, you can have a conversational thing like this. I mean, it's really nice because there's a bit of banter and it's back and forth, and it's yeah, that's kind of fun, and you feel like you're in on a conversation when you're listening. But it's, you know, for an industry podcast about giving, you know, tips and advice, I wanted to get straight to it. You know, let people listen to it before another podcast on their way home, or you know, something like that. So yeah, it was always my intention to keep it short, snappy, and to the point. Absolutely.
And it's a fairly new podcast. It launched in October 2023, so last year as we record this. What are your goals for it? And are there any podcasters or topics that that you really want to focus on, based on feedback you've had from, say, you know, podcasters you work with on your audio production company, or just what you see online, that kind of thing?
That's an interesting one. I suppose coming off, well, not coming off, being involved in the music room community, that's kind of where I get my kicks, you know, is bringing people together. So I suppose a goal for podcasting people would, you know, be a community of some description. I am wary of just diving into those kinds of things because podcasting people is as much for me as it is for the listener. I kind of count myself as a listener more than
Right.
a host for podcasting people, because I'm learning about the industry as well. You know, as I mentioned before, you know, this industry is fairly new for me. I'm gaining clients, but I haven't really networked a huge amount in the industry. So I'm a bit wary to you know, not to mess up that first impression in a way. So my answer to that is just graft. You know, get down
Right.
to it, keep producing the content. I don't know if content's a dirty word, but keep producing, get those episodes out, get out as much advice as possible, and let that work speak for itself, really. And see what the response is like over this year. And then, yeah, I'd like to think a community would be good, but then maybe there is a community out there that I'm missing. I don't know. Maybe your
Well, and I think
listeners
that's
can let me know.
well, I think that's a great thing about the podcasting space, like you say.
Yeah,
I feel it doesn't matter what experience level you're at. It's a very open and supportive
yeah.
space, supportive community. And you will get the odd outliers, like some OG podcasters from 2004, 5, or whatever, that may feel, well, I've not got time to answer that question. That's a very basic question, but we all start somewhere. So I feel that there's no basic questions. And for the most part, it's a very supportive community. And podcasters are so happy to jump on new shows as well, which obviously, you know, with some of the guests that you've had on podcasting people, you know, there's no ego there, I don't feel. And it's great to see, you know, there's always space for new shows about other topics, and podcasters are happy to jump on. So yeah, it'd be great to see how this expands and grows outward for sure.
Well, it would be lovely, Danny, if you would record an episode with me, being a
Oh,
podcast
well,
professional yourself.
that was not a pitch, by the way. When I asked that question, that was, I'm going to have to put a disclaimer at the bottom of the screen now and say, oh, upcoming blatant promo pitch coming up or something.
No, but yeah, absolutely, you'd be very welcome. And in a kind of connected way, you work with the company that hosts podcasting people, so it's a kind of circle of life kind of thing, isn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly. No,
Yeah,
no, for sure. I'd love to. And thanks for asking. I'll definitely connect and we'll chat about that for sure.
yeah, nice one.
Now, a question that I do like to ask guests, especially because it's a podcasting show and my other podcast. If you could have come up with the idea of someone else's podcast that
Oh,
you really like or admire, what would it be? What would be your show that you would have liked to have created, and why that one?
that's well, I suppose I do have some favourites at the moment. One I've consistently listened to throughout, which I think was a really good move. There's a show on in the UK called QI,
Yep.
which was Stephen Fry, now it's Sandy Toksvig hosting, and it's quite interesting basically. So it's all about quite interesting facts, and they have the QI elves, and the QI elves a few years ago. I say a few years ago, maybe it's about 10 years ago now. Decided to make a podcast, and they have the 4 favorite facts from each week, and they go around and they all research it, so they don't know what each other's done, and they talk about these facts and expand on them, and it's just really interesting. They should have called it really interesting rather than quite
Yeah,
interesting.
RI instead of QI. I remember
Yeah.
watching it when Stephen Fry, because I moved to Canada in 2006. I've been away for a while, but I remember it when Stephen Fry was a host, and I
Mm.
loved watching the. I'm guessing it's still a TV show. Is it moved over to podcasting altogether now, or?
No, no, no. So QI is still remaining as a TV show. The podcast is actually called No Such Thing as a Fish, which is,
Love it.
I mean, it draws you in, doesn't it? You think,
Yeah, I mean
isn't
that's
there?
if I'm scrolling past, I'm thinking, what? There is such a thing as a fish.
Exactly. So, yeah, just really interesting stuff. They've been going for years and years and years. They're now doing live shows. They've got merch. They're. I've been to see them in a big theatre. It's.
Mm.
I think they've done things like the podcast festival, London Podcast Festival, and things like that.
Okay, cool.
So that's one which I thought was really, really good. And then I do like a comedy sometimes. James Acaster recently made something called Springleaf. I don't know if you've heard
Right.
that. It's
I've
just,
not. I do love James A. Caster though.
it's bonkers. It's really silly fun. He's actually an undercover cop who's infiltrated a criminal gang and masquerading as a comedian called James Acaster. And there are loads of other comedians in it, and it's just really silly. So I love that, and there's loads of sound design which kind of appeals to me as well.
Yeah.
And then you get on the audio drama side. There's a lovely series done by which was conceived by and produced by Ella Watts, who has been a guest on Podcasting People, called Doctor Who Redacted. So this is
Oh,
kind of a spin-off from Doctor Who, but all ties in, and it's just brilliant. And again, that audio drama really appeals to me as well. I don't know how. Maybe writing music for it. I don't know, but
hmm.
yeah, I love how storytelling you can engage in any kind of senses, can't you? So
Yeah.
as much as I love writing to picture, I think there's some amazing audio dramas out there as well. Um, so yeah, those are a little handful, I'd
No,
say.
I like and every single one sounds. I mean, I knew of the QI. I didn't know of their podcast. I knew of QI. I
Yeah,
didn't know James Acaster had a podcast, but he's one of my favorite comedians. Very irreverent, not
yeah,
irrelevant,
yeah.
irreverent,
Very
irreverent.
nice.
Let's. Sorry, James. And the Doctor Who one just speaks to my geek. I grew up in the 70s in the UK with
Yeah,
John Pertwee and Tom Baker as my two main doctors. Um, and my colleague, well, both colleagues actually, but colleagues at Captivate, especially Gary, our head of design, he has a Doctor Who podcast, The Blue Box, which I think is still active. So I know he'd be really interested in that. So that
yeah,
we'll
yeah.
definitely check these ones out for sure.
Nice one.
So Gareth, mate, I need to use mate more because I'm in Canada. I don't get to use it that much. Gareth, mate,
That's okay.
this has been an absolute delight. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. For our listeners or viewers on YouTube that want to know more about, obviously, the music room or music, or even podcasting people and all the other cool stuff that you do in your day job and your evening job, maybe, where's the best place to find all that and connect with you online as well?
Okay, so I have a website for my company, The Sound Boutique, which is thesoundboutique.com, all one word. And for the music room, if you head to musicroom.community, because that's what it is, then you'll find everything there. Podcasting People is podcastingpeople.uk.
They are very easy to remember, and I'll be sure to leave all that in the description. So
Thanks.
whether you're listening on audio or watching on YouTube, check the description afterwards or the show notes on your podcast app, and all the links will be there. So again, Gareth, I really appreciate you coming on today, mate. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today on My Other Podcast Is. If you prefer the audio version, you can follow for free at myotherpodcast.com/listen. Or if you're on the YouTubes, be sure to hit that like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Take care, and we'll see you next time.